Good morning, Dupage Real Estate. How is everybody? This is going to be a great event. I've had 5 events this week, and this is the one I've been looking forward to the most because suburban real estate is kind of where it's at these days. I'm going to do a couple of quick housekeeping items here just to get us going, and then I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful moderator here. This is a second annual State of DuPage County Western Suburbs Summit. Hopefully you got the time right. Look at this load of sponsors, people. I can't say it enough times. We were able to pivot to this online environment when we'd rather be getting together live and in person, and without sponsors, there's no way we would have been able to pull this off. So it's taken time, resources, and a talented team to bring this to you. And thanks to all of these folks for making that happen. I'll probably flash that up on the screen again because that's a lot to take in. For those of you that don't know, this is us. We're part of a bigger company. RE Journals publishes in 17 different states. We have 6 publications. We do 150 events this year. So we're going to talk about state of office, industrial, retail, multifamily housing. We're going to just run the gamut, but I got to do one more screen share really quick. Just hold with me for a second. Watch the old guy try to screen share. Here we go. If you found this event, you probably found this lobby. And this is probably where you clicked here to watch this event. But here's where you can do a little bit of networking with our speakers. So if you see each of our speakers here, we've got a wonderful mayor down here. You can connect with these people on LinkedIn. So you see the little red LinkedIn button, click on that, make a connection, meet somebody new today. You can also see what they're going to talk about here, see a little bit more about our sponsors. And if you want to learn what they do, I always see this Invest Aurora, Illinois, and I never know really what they do. So then scroll down here and you can kind of find their ad. So sorry for taking up any more of your time. I know Michael already said he's got a lot to cover in a little bit of time, so they're going to go real fast. Michael, if you need anything, I'll be here in the background watching and listening. Just say, hey, Todd, I need something. But otherwise, y'all are free to go.
Thank you, Todd. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. Michael Cassa, I'm the president and CEO of the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation. Prior to that, I was the executive director of the Oswego Economic Development Corporation. And then I got my start in economic development in the Detroit area where I grew up. I was director of business development for the Chambers Regional Partnership. I have the pleasure of serving as first vice chairman of the Illinois Economic Development Association under one of our panelists, Bryan Gay, who is the chairman. So let me call on each of you to just briefly give a little background or bio. I'll start with Mayor Steve Chirico from Naperville.
Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning. I look forward to the chat. Steve Jericho, Mayor of Naperville, my second term as mayor. It feels like my 5th term after going through this last year, but all is on the bright side at this point. I come from the private sector as a business owner, so I'm certainly very passionate about this end of the important part of running a city, and that's the relationship with the business community.
Thank you. Greg Bedalov will go next to you.
Good morning, Michael. Good morning, everybody. As Michael said, I'm Greg Bedalov. I have the pleasure of serving as the president and CEO of Choose DuPage. I am in my 2nd stint as the president and CEO of Choose DuPage. I previously served as the executive director at the Illinois Tollway, as well as the executive director of the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority. I was the predecessor to Michael Cassa as the president and CEO of the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation. Prior to that, spent about 20 years in the private sector business community in international business and marketing and sales development. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Thank you. Ron Plonis, we'll go next to you.
Thanks, Michael. And again, thanks for having us. I think this is going to be a great discussion, as the mayor said. So a little bit about me. After about a 20-year career in technology and product development, I spent about 15 years in development and redevelopment, primarily in the housing sectors. Back in 2019, I joined Kiser Group in an investment advisory and brokerage role, specifically in advising clients in the redevelopment and development of mid-size or middle market multifamily developments. You know, we work with suburban and regional developers, operators, plan commissions, from site selection and valuation all the way to dispositions. In short, if anybody, my team works with 2 segments. They're either developers or owners designing, delivering, or selling newer and primarily suburban or large garden complex that are suited for redevelopment. And we can, go into more specifics during the panel.
Thank you. Bryan Gay.
All right, good morning, everybody. Bryan Gay, President and CEO of Invest Aurora. For those of you that may not know Invest Aurora, we are the public-private economic development agency for the city of Aurora. We handle all things economic development, and we're here to help attract, retain, and expand our businesses here in the city. But just real quick, a little bit more about me. So before coming to Invest Aurora, I worked for the the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, Choose Dupage. And it's kind of funny, it's like there was a joke made last year about my work history. And again, we've added one more of my previous managers to today's event. So looking forward to the conversation and talking with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Adler.
Good morning, everybody. Jim Adler with NAI Hiffman. I have been a commercial real estate broker with NAI Hiffman for 25 years. Our firm, we are locally based, privately held, the largest privately held commercial real estate firm in the Midwest. We do industrial and office leasing and sales, as well as investment sales. Thank you, Real Estate Journal. Thank you, Michael Cassa, for having us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So let's start the questioning with Mayor Chirico. Mr. Mayor, what is your outlook for the hospitality industry, specifically hotels post-pandemic? No industry, I believe, in America has been decimated more than the hotel industry.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing, actually. They're running about 30-40% occupancy right now here in Naperville. We have about 2,600 rooms to fill. And it's been, as you say, pretty devastating, because not only the rooms, but also the event space. But, despite the, sort of gloomy 2020, things are starting to look up. And it's going to take some time, but they are starting to look up. I met with yesterday, Jim, we're at the Marriott, which is one of our larger hotels, of course. And he said they have about 250 business travelers booked for March. Now, compared to March 2020, that was like 2,000 business bookings. So it's still a fraction of back to normal. But it's really a good sign, because it's the highest number of bookings that we've seen in the past year. So that's a real plus. And then on the event space side, it's interesting because there's this new concept of micro weddings that is coming about. And so he has had a whole number of these bookings for these smaller weddings for people just tired of kicking the can down the road on their special date. But then in addition to that, in the fall of this year of 2021, they've got they're starting to book up solid with the major events as well. So this is great news. The addition of events coming to the city of Chicago will also help us. We have always benefited from compression in the hotel business, and so as McCormick Place starts to fire back up and major sporting events, then the overflow will spill over into the Naperville and Western Suburban market as well. So it's coming back. It's going to take some time, but the good news is that I think the worst is over.
That would be great news. Let me ask Greg Bedalov to comment on something. Greg, I think the county and Choose Dupage have done a remarkable job providing financial assistance to businesses, especially in that key hospitality sector of restaurants. But can you talk about what Choose Dupage has done to help our existing businesses in the county during the pandemic?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. The DuPage County stepped up. Through CARES Act dollars, the county allocated dollars, resources, information, and opportunity to businesses throughout DuPage. And Choose DuPage was proud to administer the Reinvest DuPage program, which allocated over $20 million to more than 1,600 businesses throughout DuPage County. Started originally with all businesses, as long as there were 15 employees or fewer, and revenue ceilings that originally started at 1.5 million. As the program evolved and advanced, we made it a little more specific through recommendations that we heard from the business community and heard from economic development experts and leaders like yourself, elected officials like Mayor Jericho, who said we have to help these restaurants. We have to, we have to get back to seeing how we can support businesses, especially in the food and beverage industry. So we tweaked the program and made it exclusively for establishments where 50% of the revenue came from food and beverage. And we were really, really grateful. And it was really heartwarming to see the number of businesses that we were able to help and keep those businesses afloat. Unfortunately, that program is no longer active. So it's kind of a good news, bad news. The good news is we went through the money super, super quick. And I know other municipalities did as well. We're waiting, like probably a lot of folks on this call are waiting to hear from the federal government and the upcoming stimulus package and the details of it. I feel comfortable in saying if there is state and local assistance as part of that program, I've already had discussions with many members of the county board, and it seems like there is a positive appetite to do another program similar to the one that we did. We'll be looking at the business community again. We'll be looking to the elected officials and the economic development leaders to see what changes we should make to the program if we have an additional round of funding. Should we increase the dollar amount per grant? Should we add additional restrictions? You know, how should the program look if we decide to do it again? But again, at the end of the day, $20 million was pumped into the local economy. And I know from talking to restaurants, I know from talking to businesses, the thank you cards that we've received from businesses. And this was micro businesses. Yeah, thanks for the thumbs up, Mayor Chirico. I know that Naperville had hundreds of businesses that applied and received the grant. And I know it made a difference in helping keep them afloat. It's so great that I actually went out to lunch yesterday with people face to face in Naperville, and I didn't break any rules by doing it because indoor dining is open again in Illinois. And as that continues to grow, so too will the opportunities for recovery. Michael, if I may, a quick point on what Mayor Chirico said about the hospitality industry. Really tickled to death that the hospitality industry and 501c6s and the agencies that help support the hospitality industry were included in some of the changes that were made to PPP. Organizations like the Dupage Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Naperville Convention and Visitors Bureau, and your very own Convention and Visitors Bureau in Downers Grove were able to qualify for PPP loans where previously you had not. So your voices were heard. We wanted it to get done a lot quicker, but at the end of the day, we were pleased that that was able to happen. And as Mayor Chirico said, 30% occupancy throughout Dupage County, 40% occupancy throughout Dupage County. That not only has an impact on hotel motel revenue and what that does for local municipalities, but when you think about the dining options, when you think about gas, when you think about clothing and everything else that impacts, the trade workers who have to set up the trade shows, it's a tremendous ripple effect throughout our entire economy. And when people get comfortable and we get the vaccine rolled out fully, I hope that we see that return to some level of normalcy.
You made a number of good points, Greg, and I know that Downers Grove businesses received a lot of the grants from the county, so thank you. Bryan, I know that in the city of Aurora is doing a number of, through your organization, number of programs to assist your local businesses. Can you maybe mention one for us?
Yeah, so just recently on February 15th, the city of Aurora announced their SURF program. And so what that is coronavirus economic relief fund. And so between three different programs, we have a food and beverage tax abatement program. There is a liquor license forgiveness program for 21. And then there's also an additional $1.2 million together. Those funds will be available right now for the application period and then closing out next week on March 3rd. But together with that program, as well as the stable fund program that Invest Aurora administered for the city last year, we'll give out at the end of all of this about $4 million to our local area businesses. So, again, kind of combined with what Greg said and all the municipalities throughout Dupage and the Western Suburbs, we're all trying to do our part to make sure that our small businesses stay open and stay vibrant.
Thank you. One of the things there has been, I'm sure everyone knows this, there's been this explosion of opportunities for people who want to move to Dupage County, especially in the multifamily area. We have in Downers Grove in our downtown 2 very successful multifamily projects that were completed. So let me ask Ron, which submarkets in Dupage are you seeing multifamily development starting or in progress?
Well, just to extend on your Downers Grove example, Burlington Station and Maple and Main, and even on a smaller scale, East Village apartment, they were very successful. And there's other areas that are demographically similar to Downers Grove, most notably like Glen Ellen. and also Quincy Station, which is a sister property to Burlington Station. There was a groundbreaking ceremony for that in Westmont. And even in Lombard, there is a 215 unit redevelopment happening. It's right now called Park Avenue. It'll be Park 150. And then also Lilac Station, which is another 88 units. So there's a lot. Now, to dig a little bit deeper, I would say that the most active suburb in Dupage right now would be Glen Ellen, with Riva development delivering a Veron Duane of 48 units, another Apex 400, another 107 units, and then Holiday also has a development there similar to Burlington Station that's going to be 86 units. And it seems, wow, 241 units in one downtown. How much of this is dependent on train? And we could get into that as well. But that 241 units is only about 50 to 55% of what Glen Ellen's downtown master plan is. So there's been with all the discussions I've had with those developers, there's been no concern about absorption, and the demographics are really correlated to not commuters. I mean, if you going back to Downers Grove, in all of those developments, it was 20 to 25% commuter and has dropped to about 15%. It's really in-town demographics, and the fact that those downtowns can support a train station correlate to demographics, which also want to rent luxury product. I mean, we saw leasing and vacancy improve during COVID in many of the unit types because they're larger than what's available in the city. So I'll leave it at that for now.
One of the markets that a lot of our communities throughout the county and the western suburbs focus on is Class A office, especially corporate headquarters. I know in our community, that's an important part of our local economy, something Greg works on every day. So a question for Jim Adler: how has COVID-19 impacted leasing in the western suburbs? We've heard there is a surge of large blocks of sublease space downtown. Is this trend playing out in the suburbs too? Who's active in the marketplace? Give us kind of an overview.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, office space has been a very popular topic over the past year or so as people move to a work from home model. And I think there's been a lot of conflicting reports, particularly nationally, about what's going on in the world of office. If you look at, some of the words celebrities like Mark Cuban have said, well, the office is dead, it'll never come back. And then on the other side of that, you had people like Sam Zell come out and say, in a year, everyone's back in the office. We've read a lot about technology firms putting sublease space on the market. And yet in 2020, firms like Microsoft, Facebook, and Amazon have leased literally millions of square feet of office space in dozens of cities around the country. So you have some conflicting news. In fact, Amazon just this week, if you haven't seen it, unveiled their 2.8 million square foot HQ2 rendering dubbed the Helix. If you haven't seen that, check it out. It's pretty cool. And then locally here, downtown Chicago, we've read Uber has put and other technology firms, Yelp, have put space on the sublease market. And yet on the heels of that, a company like Salesforce stands up and says, you know what, we just leased 500,000 square feet to anchor a building on the river, and we fully intend to occupy that space. Certainly, we've seen some of that in Dupage as well. We've seen firms put their space on a sublease market, but we've also seen the opposite. And statistically, as we look at 2020, downtown Chicago was running at about roughly 50% of new leasing activity in 2020 as compared to the previous 3-year average. The suburbs, by contrast, in 2020 did 86.5% of new leasing activity 2020 as compared to the previous 3 years average. So that feels pretty good. 86.5%. That's like a B plus. I don't know, Greg, if you can back me up on that one. It feels like a B plus, but it feels pretty good. And we've seen it at NEI Hiffman. We've seen, we leased 1,000 square foot last week to a group coming out of Virginia. We toured a space a few weeks ago with a trading firm coming out of Overland, Kansas. You may have read the marketing firm Straticage acquired the McCain Foods building. That's a 100,000 square foot building that's can accommodate several hundred jobs. So there's some exciting things. Not to say that there aren't headwinds and there won't be those companies that choose to sublease their space or do something different, but there does seem to be some positive movement overall.
Great, that's good news. We've briefly touched on office, retail, and multifamily. Let me pivot to industrial and ask Bryan Gay, what kind of activity have you seen in the market for industrial? Maybe give us some examples of some projects that you've been involved in.
Yeah, so over the last year, despite the pandemic, industrial continues to do well in Aurora. Just in the last 12 months, we've seen 1,000 new jobs created in the city between firms like Amcino moving their corporate headquarters and future manufacturing facility to the city. Sonova is a hearing aid company that had an existing facility in Aurora, and now they're in the process of moving about 450 employees from surrounding suburbs to Aurora, and then expanding out their footprint as well in the 750 North Commerce building. So, we're seeing those. We're also seeing, because of just new types of manufacturing that are making their way into the market. We have a micro factory startup called Via Photon that's looking to take advantage of broadband connectivity, fiber optic manufacture of little components to that. So, we're seeing them. So we're seeing it across the board. And then you look at just the number of projects coming into our office, on inquiries, looking for manufacturing space for some commercial office. It's all about manufacturing right now. And I would expect that Aurora and all of the Western suburbs are going to be able to benefit from this surge of activity.
Thank you very much. I misspoke. We haven't touched on retail. I'm going to correct that right now and ask Mayor Chirico, how can the leadership in a community change the trajectory of a retail corridor? A lot of us share Ogden Avenue as an example, as a corridor. So I'll turn it over to you and talk about that retail redevelopment opportunity that's hopefully still out.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think the main thing is this. Obviously, we talk a lot about, government providing assistance in some form or other, whether it be grants or incentives and things like that. And certainly that's important. But, one of the things that we found is that being committed to your vision, community, I think is probably one of the most important things that we can do as government to make sure that an area stays on track. And I think, the East Western Corridor, Naperville, is a great example of that. We actually went through zoning changes to tighten up zoning in that area, because we were concerned that it was going to fall off into the types of uses that were generally not really desirable, for a vibrant business district. And so, we adjusted zoning. We invested in the area, whether it be undergrounding electric lines or, some simple things like signage and painting electrical transformers and things like that, just to clean things up and try to invest in some of the streetscapes as well and beautify the area. But mainly it's staying focused on what your commitment is to the area. And it's very tempting to, especially during difficult periods like the last year, to consider lowering your standards just so you can fill spaces out there. And we didn't. We stuck to our vision and worked with different businesses. And of course, in this particular case of East Ogden Avenue, the Costco came in, and that was something that we had worked on for a long time. And it has a halo effect. And now all the other, surrounding business buildings in that area have been occupied and are or in the process of being built out. So great success story. But it takes, commitment to that vision, because I think that what can happen as leaders is you get nervous, just like any, building owner who wants to occupy your space, and sometimes you make the wrong decision from a long-term perspective, just to have short-term, comfort, and that's a mistake, I think, generally. So we've been really focused on that, and I think in different districts throughout our community, we have just repeated that model of staying focused on what we believe this business district can look like long-term.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me stay on that topic. As everyone's aware, under Illinois' tax structure, municipalities are so dependent on sales tax. And so while the state, and to a certain extent, the counties focus more on office, manufacturing, distribution centers and the like, At the local level, retail just remains such an important priority. Greg, let me ask you, countywide, what is it you're seeing in terms of the challenges, the opportunities for municipalities to deal with shopping centers that are, they're way past their prime in terms of their age and appearance and losing tenants?
Yeah, Michael, I'll answer that question, but I want to kind of go back to what Jim said, because I think it's an important word, and it's headwinds. The reality with retail is pre-COVID, there was headwinds in the retail marketplace.
Yeah.
E-commerce just created a whole new way for all of us to get goods delivered to our front door. And that creates challenges for some of the older malls and some of the older products. And as Mayor Chirico points out, trying to stick to that long-term vision, but trying to be nimble and flexible in order to capture revenue that municipalities and the county desperately needs is a challenge. It's not easy. We're seeing malls throughout DuPage County, some of the older product, some of the stuff that's a little long in the tooth, start to look at more experiential retail opportunities, start to look at more interactive retail opportunities. We're seeing a lot of sports venues. It's no secret that we all drive our children, for those of us who are soccer moms and dads, soccer parents, to Rockford and Peoria and Indianapolis for tournaments and whatnot, because DuPage does not have that product. I think what you're going to start seeing, and I know you're going to start seeing it because I was in a meeting last week with a mall owner who wanted to convert a vacant store into an experiential sports themed type of facility. So, making sure that, but now again, how much retail sales tax is involved for the municipality when you go from a good old fashioned brick and mortar store to something that's more experiential. So how you balance that, because you're right, the municipalities rely on that. So, from a flexibility and to be nimble and to be entrepreneurial and look at these opportunities and figure out ways to remove barriers instead of creating barriers is going to be really, really critically important. And it ties into an opportunity, Michael, and we all know what that opportunity is. And it goes to your question on industrial. It depends on your definition of industrial, because transportation, distribution, and logistics and warehousing, you saw it in Downers Grove with the Amazon deal. We're seeing it in Itasca with the bridge deal. You're seeing more and more businesses look at DuPage County as a hub to be able to quickly move their services and their goods from point A to point B, because that's what the consumer is demanding, which is why I'm sorry, but I must put in a shameless plug why we have to continue to remain focused on Western access to O'Hare. And for years, that project had been based on people and a Western terminal and moving people in and out of O'Hare. And Chairman Cronin and Choose DuPage and all the mayors throughout that corridor recognize that presents opportunity not only for multifamily housing, not only for traditional brick and mortar industrial, but for TD&L. And TD&L is going to be a growth market for DuPage County for the next 5 years. Some like that, some don't, but the reality is that it's going to be a growth market. And if we want to embrace it, we should make sure that we're doing everything we can to support it. Last point on that, Michael, and another challenge that we're having, I don't want to be, the doom and gloom guy on this call, certainly, but if you don't recognize the headwinds, there's just no way that you're going to address it. Two things. Again, kind of going back to Jim's point on industrial, land prices in DuPage, perhaps rightfully so, are higher than they are in Kane County and Kendall County and places out west of us. And when businesses can move their goods quickly and efficiently because of enhancements in transportation, the land price of property in DuPage becomes oftentimes a barrier to growth when they can just as easily go out to Kane and DuPage. We compete with Chicago for office. Well, now we're really starting to compete with Kane and McHenry, and regional collaboration and cooperation are just going to be so critical moving forward. And that's why the Chicago Regional Economic Recovery Task Force, Chairman Cronin, myself, a bunch of other folks sit on that task force to figure out a way to create regional pitch books, to figure out a way to promote Northeastern Illinois as just opposed to promoting our own individual little silo.
Thank you, Greg. I agree with everything you've said. You've got to deal in reality, not what you want something to be. Greg touched on Western access, and transportation in the era of COVID has been a lot of dramatic changes. People aren't taking Metro. They're not getting on a Pace bus as much as they used to. And then there's this convergence of my home life and my work life has now been put together. So a question for Ron, what multifamily trends have emerged or accelerated due to the pandemic itself? And specifically, if you could address the issue of how mass transportation has impacted people's wanting to figure out where they want to live, and is that going to become their workplace?
Okay, yeah, so a couple things. A lot of the developments that I work with are transit oriented because most of the new development occurring in the suburbs has that component to it in the middle market. Excuse me. So one trend that we've seen is it's a trend to larger unit sizes, and we can all speculate about what the new normal is or what the future is going to hold. But I think the ability to work from home and school from home and just do more things from home is going to be a durable trend. Percentages we can argue, but examples in the submarket, anything that was large unit size, 2 bedrooms or a single bedroom with a den that had a suitable workplace really had wait lists during COVID, and still really is leasing faster than smaller units. Now, to your question about transit, I could talk specifically, and I alluded to it earlier. Most of these developments weren't majority. It feels like in the city, transit-oriented developments in Chicago, transit is a big piece. It's a big piece of the neighborhood. But in the suburbs, it's more about, again, the correlation between the demographic that can support a meaningful train station is what rents these luxury in-town apartments because of the retail, because of the dining, because of the configuration of the downtown. So when you have a metro station that has, whatever it's top 15 in weekday boardings, that directly always correlates to a good downtown. I don't want to say work play anymore because we don't know what that is, but those demographics can support that development. But it's mainly, the biggest segment in a lot of these developments are empty nesters. So that is unaffected by COVID. Their reasoning to stay in multifamily is to stay in town because of their extended family lives there, vice versa, young professionals or empty nesters, and they want to stay in town, but they don't want to maintain their $18,000 tax bill on their house, or they don't want to maintain their house. So it's really staying in the community that drives most of that leasing, not necessarily commuting.
Okay, well, thank you. There's probably no industry, no sector in this country where there's more question marks than the office sector. Our company is going to be shedding space. When are they going to have their employees come back to work? And that affects their leases, all because of COVID. So Jim Adler, what are some of the challenges of the return to office for both owners and occupiers, landlords and tenants? And how will the return to office look post-COVID compared to pre-COVID?
It's a great question. And I think, again, I'm going to use the step back and take a national perspective for a second. Cassa, the security card company, and they released a report of usage of those security cards. And told us that in the Chicago region, we're at about 20% occupancy, which feels about right. If you look at some other cities like Miami, it's north of 50%. So it's interesting. And some of our friends in Florida and our friends in Texas seem to play by a different set of rules. They very much returning to the office already. Here in Chicago, it's a little bit different. We're a little bit more careful group, I guess, more responsible, maybe you could argue. But in any case, where we see the challenges, quite frankly, is in downtown Chicago, because there's a resistance to want to take public transportation for so many employees, particularly those who haven't been vaccinated yet. So taking the Metro, taking the L, taking the bus, getting to that building is an issue. The second issue is waiting in a line for an elevator. And I had a colleague, friend told me just last week, a high building downtown, that the line to the elevator was starting to look like the line to Great America. And so that's really scary for those people who have to work in that downtown high rise. And I think it probably speaks to some of the statistics that I mentioned earlier of the bump in leasing activity in the suburbs, because in the suburbs, we really don't have those issues. We don't have the train issues necessarily, we don't have the public transportation issues. We really don't have the elevator issues in the same way that a downtown high rise does. We have a lot of single story product. I have another colleague who released a report earlier this week in the activity in the single story space. He said it's the highest amount of activity he's ever had in his career. And I think that's really telling. People are gravitating towards those one-story buildings because there's no common area amenities, there's no elevators, they're easy to get in your office. Low rise, mid rise, suburbia, same sort of thing. So the other thing I think for building owners, it's a little bit easier to address building systems, get your building cleaned, address the HVAC and the vents, and be able to do things differently and to try to create, to the extent that you can, a healthy building. You can get your arms around that for a 100,000 square foot building. That's a lot harder to do downtown. So we see the challenge probably playing out in the city and probably to some extent benefiting the suburbs as companies look at their occupancy downtown and say, you know what, this is really challenging. Maybe go to a hub and spoke model, or maybe I'll set up a satellite office in the suburbs because it's just a little bit easier.
Jim, let me follow up with that, because we've seen in Downers Grove, there has been it seems to be a fewer number of companies that are contemplating relocating to the city. There's one company in particular that had made the decision to move their corporate headquarters to Chicago, and then they changed their mind in light of COVID. Do you see that as a real trend where the competition between Chicago and the suburbs for office projects will truly be transitional, or is it more just a short-term trend?
In the last 10 years, there has been a movement towards the city from suburban companies. There's no question, if we look at some of the headquarters in the outlying suburbs, whether it be Motorola or Walgreens or you name them, or McDonald's have gravitated towards the city. They've torn up their leases, or they've just decided to refresh. And so much of that is driven by talent and the cost of talent. You can employ millennials at a lesser rate than you can somebody who's been working in the workforce for 30, 40 years, and they were living in the city. The interesting thing that we saw in 2020 is that the suburbs experienced a wave of people moving out of the city and moving to the suburbs. That's a trend that was actually already happening. We were already starting to see millennials move to Aurora, move to Naperville, move to Lisle. That was already happening. And in 2020, that just got propelled forward. And I'm sure Ron can speak as he looks at his numbers in terms of the amount of people that are moving to the suburb. That's on the uprise. So if I'm a company and I'm thinking about, well, I want to go downtown because that's where all the talent is, I'm absolutely going to pause, because I'm not sure that that's where all the talent is. I think a lot of the talent that maybe was there 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, is starting to think about or has already chosen to move in the suburbs. And I might instead go back to a spoke model where I have a location there and a location here, or I might just stay in the suburbs. I might be better off, particularly with the challenges of COVID, also because there's this millennial movement and this interest in the suburban residential.
Thank you. You know, Greg's point about living in the real world, being a realist and developing a strategy around that is something you're all speaking to. Bryan, let me ask you, I know there's been talk of, there's plans for a major redevelopment around the Fox Valley Mall, multifamily, but just maybe talk about that, but also just in general, how your municipality handles the idea that we may have to go to a different direction than maybe we wanted to.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of several of our panelists this morning have already kind of spoken to this, but whatever you want to call it. Is it right sizing? Is it the move from the city core out to the suburbs? There's a lot of different things happening. So specifically, Michael, to your question, I believe you're talking about the Fox Valley Mall.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what the city is working with Centennial Properties to do. So right now, the first major domino has fallen on this, and that's the demolition of the existing Sears building there. So that has been vacant for a number of years, and kind of, question, a few years back as well. Now what? Since that point, we've had Carson Perry Scott do the same thing, and again, we're asking the question, well, now what? So I know working with Centennial, this new development, we're looking at creating within the ring road of the mall is, a three building, 3-story, 304 multifamily units that is going to kind of create that live, work, play environment. And really what it's doing is creating, now with the Sears demoed, we're going to be able to create a new entrance into the mall that's going to create opportunities that, rather than the people coming to the mall, we have the mall coming to the people in this case, and that we are creating those, experiential services. There are sports, there are, sports event facilities that are looking to kind of build around this as well. We have theaters. We just opened up a new bowling alley within the mall as well. So there's all these different things that, again, rather than people going to the mall, they're coming back out this way to the people, and creating that sense of place within there. And it's not just residential either. It is parks. It is a community center. It's all these different things that, again, make it a more sticky environment where people are going to go and stay there for the long term instead of kind of going out into the larger area. But then, to the point about downtown, downtowns and what makes a strong downtown. We did a study in 2019 and had a couple updates since, but we've found that there is, in downtown Aurora, vacancy rate, for residential is like less than 3% at this point. So people, are still kind of gravitating to that. We have a metro station, we have access to Pace and everything else, but there's really this surge of need for residential in our downtown. And so, over the next 12 months, we see about 120 new multifamily residential units, market rate residential units coming into the downtown. That's on top of 80 units that were added last year and the year before. And then, we have currently in-house plans for 3 different sites on both the east bank of the river, west bank of the Fox Valley River, or the Fox River, and then, kind of all points in between for an additional 500 market rate residential units. So, we're seeing, we're seeing some huge growth in there. We also, and our friend Michael Poulikitis is on the second panel for this morning to talk about his project. But we also have like Old Copley Hospital. So we're seeing these adaptive reuses of these 100-year-old buildings that for no good reason up to this point, just other than a lack of interest or kind of the perception that something's not happening, but it's happening here in Aurora. And so that Michael and his team at Fox Valley Developers, they're taking the Old Copley Hospital and creating a new community within our community. It's 120 unit senior living community, 53 units for independent living for those individuals with developmental disabilities. There's a medical care facility. There's the new District 131 school administration building. And then on top of all that, again, kind of creating that sticky environment to have people stick around and kind of that live, work, play thing is, additional two acres of community park for that. So we're seeing that, and we're seeing support from the community. We're also seeing support, from the state, from the counties on this as well. So, this project, and Michael will talk about this, like I said, this project, the Old Copley Hospital, also known as Avalon Heights, is the first recipient in Kane County for the KEEP program or the CPACE program. They're receiving $3 million through that program to help, encourage that development of these existing spaces.
Thank you. Bryan touched on downtown Aurora. Let me ask the mayor, what do you see as long-term impacts of COVID-19 on suburban downtowns such as Naperville?
Yeah. It's, and this is another transition of uses or spaces that I think started before COVID, but certainly COVID has pushed this along. I mean, Greg mentioned earlier about our changed shopping behaviors, and the effect of retail spaces and uses. And, again, being committed to your downtown and continue to invest in it. I'll speak about, because I'm familiar with it, has really gotten through COVID quite well. Surprising how many new businesses opened up during this period of time and very few failed. There's always that grind of businesses going in and out, even during good times. One of the things that keeps a community vibrant. I mean, you have businesses that start up that just don't, cut the mustard, right? So as we start to see some of these malls convert or fail, that will, I think, add to the value of well-maintained and well-planned downtowns. And we're seeing that. Naperville has, outside of Chicago, been the #1 sales tax generator in the state. Same with food and beverage for restaurants. #1 restaurant industry outside of Chicago in the state. And it's because we're committed to that space and making sure that this is the type of place that guests from out of town are welcome. We have great variety. We make sure that it's safe. And I think that as this goes on post-COVID, we're going to see this actually increase. People still need things to do. And, downtowns will, I think, be that entertainment venue for them. And the industry right now, for better or worse, is people's entertainment, especially with younger people. Who would have known that is what they would want to do? I mean, our parents, maybe went to the mall for, shopping for a day out. But kids, younger people, they love food. They're all foodies.
That's a good thing with regard to food and beverage tax, no doubt.
It is.
All of us have had to, economic developers have had to, and municipal leaders have had to follow all the different trend lines on the different sectors. We've touched on a lot of them today. The one that has been the most resilient, I think, throughout the country, as well as in the Chicago area, has been that industrial sector, especially with the proliferation of e-commerce facilities. So I want to ask Greg about the industrial sector in Dupage County in general, but also how the county stacks up against other parts of the Chicago area to land these larger facilities.
Sure. Well, industrial is doing great in Dupage right now. Quite frankly, the business park out in West Chicago that I know Jim and his team are involved in, it's nearly built out. And when the county made the conscious decision to kind of take the handcuffs off that property and go for businesses that maybe had a better fit than the original focus on there, we saw what happened out in West Chicago. The concern, Michael, and I don't want to just continue to ham and egg this entire conversation with my friend Jim Adler, but the concern is inventory is becoming slim and available land prices are going higher and higher. So we're going to have to make sure as a county and as municipalities within the county that we keep an eye on things that give us a competitive advantage, like our property tax. No secret that Fritz Kagi has gone into Cook County and said it's time to start reassessing those buildings. It's also no secret that some folks may look at that as an opportunity to maintain the delta between Dupage County and Cook County. And if Cook County's raising theirs 20%, well, maybe we can get away with raising ours 10% and still maintain that delta. I maintain that that's a foolish strategy, to be perfectly blunt. We have to do everything we can. I see Ron nodding, now more than ever, we have to do everything that we can to maintain every competitive advantage that we have going for us. Industrial is great, but when we look at the limited properties that are available for continued industrial growth, we got to make sure that we don't do anything to make that harder to develop than it already is. And one point that Jim made, Michael, that I think is again really important, and I'm not an epidemiologist and I'm certainly not a political animal or trying to say anything political, but Jim made a point that you look at activity down in Florida and some other states, and you certainly see more activity than we're seeing here. Now, we are all shamelessly and optimistically focused on Dupage County and our municipalities, and we will all work to the death to make sure that we continue to promote our municipality and our county. But I'm going to remind everybody that pre-COVID, unemployment in Dupage was less than 2%. Office vacancy was, maybe 15% in Class A office space. Industrial vacancy was next to nothing. We absolutely need a strong Chicago to maintain a strong Dupage and a strong region. And again, not making a statement here for the record, but maybe we need to look at what some of the other regions are doing from a business perspective and how that is positively impacting them. Because for me in Dupage and for you in Downers and for Bryan and Aurora, a big part of our job is about Dupage versus the city. And a big part of our job is about how we are recruiting corporate headquarters. But an equally big part of our job is about the region versus another region. I remember having numerous conversations with you and others in economic development positions about, we need to be competitive with South Carolina and Florida and Texas and the like. And my concern is that if we continue, and I don't know, Jim, as you pointed out, I don't know if we're more responsible, less responsible, smarter, or dumber, but I know that our activity is not the same as we're seeing in other parts of the country. And if we don't, at least as business leaders and elected officials, look at that and say, maybe we need to, I was proud to choose Dupage, and I believe the Choose Dupage's reopen Dupage plan, which I know Mayor Chirico and I had many conversations on. I was proud of the fact that Dupage County presented a plan to the governor's office, which we believe spurred his plan. And if we don't continue to press people and don't continue to advocate for the reopening of our business community, we are going to continue to punch below our weight. Chicago's words, CMAP's words, not my words. And we're going to continue to face these struggles. Yes, there'll be opportunities. We'll have wins in multifamily. We'll have wins in other areas. But from an overall economic development perspective, it will create more headwinds than it creates tailwinds.
It was very, very well stated, Greg. Let me ask the others on the panel to kind of follow up on that. What do you see? This is a question from me directly to everybody. What do you see, whether it's multifamily, office, municipalities, what do you see as sort of the biggest threat to your economic success, whether you're competing with another area, another state, whatever? What is your sector that you represent, or your cities, most concerned about in terms of economic development and business success? Start with Ron.
Well, I wish I had Greg's ability to be politically correct about political statements, but since you brought up the question, the biggest threat in our sector is property taxes. I think setting the trends that were accelerated by the pandemic and the accelerated flight from, I believe, more smaller unit sizes and less work and play and an element of safety that exists in denser urban areas, to the flight, setting all of that aside, when we just talk about the suburbs, the biggest threats are, what are the property tax risks? And that is all directly correlated. The Cook County always comes into focus because I think they have the most improperly managed pensions on a municipality basis.
That is politically correct.
Yes, I did it. And everyone who knows me well knows that that was hard for me to do. Anyway, and then in Dupage, there's really, from a township to township level, there's really only one or two that have any systemic risk. And it all goes back to things that have happened in the past and how things were managed in the past. And that's a hard problem to solve. So you say things like, how do we be like Texas or Florida? There's a certain element of, we have to jump in the Wayback Machine to make that happen. Now, to Greg's point, we can't give up. We have to push forward with the reality we're in. But I do feel that, on for the most part, property tax risk is the most that I hear from developers and out of state investors in terms of looking for multifamily product. Now, on the other hand, we just brought something to market in Cook County with very high property taxes relative to Dupage. And we got 10 offers and it sold right away. So there is still an appetite for it. So I think as long as the investment market and the population and the capital markets don't object, it's going to keep going until it gets to a critical point.
Mayor, did you want to add to that or
Yeah,
bring something up?
I think two things. I agree with Ron. The property tax is a huge thing. And, you know, to Greg's point about retail, the loss of retail sales tax base, which of course raises property taxes when you don't have other forms of revenue for municipalities. But that has been offset now with you know, internet sales tax now being brought forward to the municipalities. So that's been a big shift in the last year. We haven't seen the benefit yet, but we will. This year, 2020, Naperville, our use tax, which is driven by internet sales, is up about 40% over 2019. Pretty impressive. Now, sales tax was offset it, but the bottom line is that that revenue stream is still there through, people are still buying things just a different way. And that's important when we talk about property tax. Naperville's property tax rate right now is at a 50-year tax rate low. We've been able to do that from really diversifying our revenue streams. And just quickly, the biggest threat is, I still think, is policy, state policy in particular. If we don't have a good policy, we're going to be fighting these headwinds for a long time, and we have been. So we need to really take an internal look at some of our policies as it relates to job creation and business development in our state, because you know, it's difficult when we're competing against states that have great strategies in terms of economic development, and we haven't been winning.
Very well said. Well, it's 9:56, and so I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank everyone on the panel for your insight and your candor. And I'll just close with this. I know that these are tough times for the state in terms of their budget, but I am concerned that in the state's most recently released budget, that a number of programs that will still be there in terms of reductions of taxes and other fees that are now being canceled in effect will be there for Wisconsin and Indiana and all the states we compete with. And so business taxes are going to be going up in Illinois. When you take a reduction off the table, you've raised taxes. So that is a concern for me. I want to thank everyone. And Karen, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you. And thanks to all the panel.
Good stuff, everybody. Hey, thanks. Karen, just before you get started here, let me do a quick screen share just to remind people what's going on here. And then, so if you're on the next panel, now it's time to activate your camera and microphone and get ready to roll. If you're on the previous panel, now's the time to do this. Here we go, screen share. This is just a reminder to go back to this virtual lobby we have, and you can find out who's on this next panel and connect with them on LinkedIn by looking at their profiles here, and then look at what they're going to talk about. Another point I got to make real quick is the chat room. So a lot of people have been lighting up the chat room. If you're not paying attention to it, there's good stuff in there. That's where you want to ask questions of our panelists too. So the second panel, there's a lot of good stuff, and I hope you have a lot of good questions. So go in there and ask questions. Karen, are you ready to roll?
Yes.
Panel's all yours. I'll be here if you need me.
Thank you so much, Todd. Well, thank you so much to everyone on panel one. And of course, Todd, for keeping everything running smoothly for us this morning. And I also want to thank all of our panelists and our attendees for being here this morning. And hopefully, you know, go grab a cup of coffee. It might be your second or your fourth, but you're about to hear a ton of information on development and investment in the Western Suburbs. The first panel did a great job of kind of teeing up a couple things for us. But I am Karen Charvat. I'm with Power Forward Dupage, where we represent the best and the brightest electrical talent in and around DuPage County. Visit powerforwarddupage.com for more info. All right. How is my panel doing this morning? Look at them all. Look at them. They are ready to roll, everybody. We're going to take a moment and we're going to go ahead and have each panelist introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with, everyone's going to be really impressed here, Mike Pulakidis.
That's it. That's right.
And I did start with you so that I could just say your name right in front of everyone. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And after Mike, we'll go to Julie and then Sean McCarthy.
Great. Karen, thank you for having me, and welcome everybody. I am a local attorney and businessman. I have been in the Aurora area pretty much all of my life. I've been practicing since 1998, which seems forever ago now. Over those years, opened up several restaurants in the area, and also have purchased several residential properties, one of which we just redeveloped downtown Aurora, mixed use property, commercial on the first floor and residential on the second floor. Very exciting project that's already fully leased up. And of course, the main reason I'm here, also part of Fox Valley Developers. It's a single purpose entity that is in the process of repurposing the old Copley Hospital, 11-acre site in Aurora on the southeast side. And we are repurposing it into a 96-unit senior living facility that consists of both independent, assisted, and memory care units. And then also an exciting residential community that is called an independent apartment community. And that is a residential community for adults with cognitive and developmental disabilities. That is a growing area of need. And so we're very excited about those two residential components to our project. And then we are also bringing back healthcare to the area with a small healthcare center. And so that project has been going on for a few years now. We're very excited. We're in the construction phase, and excited to be able to share some of what I've gone through and what our team has gone through in getting this project towards that now and where it will be in the future. So thanks for having me.
Excellent, excellent. That's a lot to talk about, and those are incredibly exciting projects. Now, Bryan Gay did try and steal your thunder, and I got a hold of him right in the chat, and I said, no, Bryan Gay, you will not steal my panel's thunder. So we're going to come back to you on all of that stuff, Michael. Julie.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everybody. I am Julie Sinise. I'm excited to be on the panel this morning and tell you a little bit more about CPACE, which is fairly new to the market. I am the director for the Upper Midwest market for Greenworks Lending, and we kind of define the Upper Midwest as Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Greenworks Lending is the largest provider of commercial property assessed clean energy, which is also known as CPACE in the nation. We were founded by and are led by several of the industry's leading policy developers. Greenworks actually began in 2015, literally with the sole goal of bringing CPACE financing to building owners and developers across the country, really in an effort to combine a positive environmental impact, which is very important to Greenworks, but also while providing the dollars to make that happen. In Q4 of 2020 alone, our financings generated over 1.3 million megawatt hours of lifetime energy, saving CO2 reduction equivalent to 100 square miles of forest over 20 years. So we're really proud of sort of the financing that we can do, but also the sustainability that we are reaching. We truly believe in the impact that the CPACE product has on both the environment and our borrowers. So really with CPACE, in other words, we're saving you money, and we're also doing good for our environment.
I love the whole CPACE funding discussion, and I'm excited that we're going to talk more about it this morning. So thank you, Julie. Sean McCarthy, you are up next.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Sean McCarthy. I'm a Vice President of Business Development for Comcast. In my role, it's really, I always say it's really economic development for the company. So I work with property managers, developers, our local economic development partners, and make sure that technology infrastructure is a part of your development plans. Prior to joining Comcast, I was the director of the Illinois Department of Commerce, where I was in charge of recruiting businesses to Illinois, helping retain businesses in Illinois, and really try to increase the quality of life for all residents in Illinois. So before we start, I just wanted to thank that first panel, which had some great economic developers in there. I want to thank the leadership, Mayor Chirico, and obviously all of the staff and everyone at Choose Dupage and Greg Bedalov. But you know, our local economic development partners are such an important part of, they're really the front line of all these different economic development projects, but also the growth and activity in our counties and in the Western Suburbs. So just want to thank that first panel. It was exciting to hear and look forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Next, we have Mr. Dan Allen.
So good morning, everyone. I am the director of an organization called Cisco, Construction Industry Service Corporation. And we represent 8,000 union contractors, small and medium-sized businesses in Northeastern Illinois, along with 140,000 skilled, highly trained union men and women. So the joint partnership, I talk about it, a lot of people, you know, as Mike talks about the exciting projects of Aurora, and Sean talks and Julie talks about the renewable energy, and Sean talks about this economic growth. It's so imperative that we have, you know, the skilled trained workforce that can do it. That's one of the major, you know, attractions. And I will tell you this, that, you know, that Chicago, Northeastern Illinois has the highest skilled trained workforce anywhere in the country. And that comes from general contractors. I'm on a nationwide board and they say it over and over again. So we're proud. It's the training centers, there's a number of them located in Dupage. Many of these businesses are in Dupage. They buy the materials from there. So it's a big driver of the economic development in there. And one of the things I'd like to touch on is that the joint apprenticeship. So half of our board is made up of the small businesses, half of labor. And they work together collaboratively in all these different training centers with the curriculum. They fund them privately. The contractors invest in safety, training, and the most efficient energy efficiency programs, as well as the union. And they basically are the second largest privately funded educational system in the country, which we're very proud of. And it is more and more imperative now as we go through with energy and COVID type things that we adapt, and we are nimble on that with these training centers to do that. So glad to be aboard, and a lot of interesting topics.
Absolutely, and ensuring that we do have a expertly trained workforce, and again, so highly skilled in safety is paramount. So thank you for being with us this morning, Dan. And rounding out our panel of experts for you this morning, viewers, we have Sean Reynolds with JLL. Sean.
Good morning. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
I am Sean Reynolds. I'm a managing director with Jones Lang LaSalle. I've been in commercial real estate since 1998 and with JLL for about the last 13 years. I lead our data center practice and in the Midwest, and I spend all my time on site acquisitions, Midwest across the country for data center development, site dispositions, repurposing facilities that can be readily converted to data center developments, and then extremely active with many end users and tenants and occupants of those data centers specifically. I am a Downers Grove resident. I have been in Downers Grove for about 13 years and got 4 kids under 14, and hopefully you don't see them causing any trouble in the neighborhood, but they're still early in the process. So at some point, I'm sure you'll come across them. But thank you. Excited to talk today.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. I think that, you know, both panels really are bringing a lot this morning. And I do want to say once again, thank you so much for spending a little time with us. We're going to kind of peer into that crystal ball and have you share what you see. I certainly know it's not easy. not going to hold you to it, but I'm going to go ahead and get right to it with our first question, or forecast, I guess you might say. And that is, what do you see as current and future investment and development trends or opportunities? And then as a follow-up to that, so everyone's got to pay attention, as a follow-up to that, what types of properties then would be most attractive to investors? And Mike, I think I'm going to start with you, with you know, your intriguing stories. If you would go ahead and kick off this segment for our viewers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And let me just start out by saying that, Karen, that it does, you know, you have that cliche, it takes a village, right? With the project that we had of our size, Bryan Gay is 100% correct in not underscoring the importance that his team at West Aurora had on this project. The city of Aurora, Kane County, I have to give kudos to where they're due. But not just that, to what Dan had mentioned, the union leadership in the area, right? That labor force is second to none, right? And what they have done to help us make this project possible when it comes to everything from making sure we get quality labor to making sure that we meet our budgets, right? A lot of times when you throw the cliche, you might hear you think union and you think, you know, budgets, but they sat with us, they worked with us. It was unbelievable what the impact was to our project that they had. So enough of that. I'll talk to you about what our trends that we're seeing, right? The trends that we're seeing and why we felt that this project was perfect was, and I'm going to speak to senior living. The senior, everyone knows or should know that the senior, the aging community is growing, right? And part of what's growing is what's called the forgotten middle market. And you see a great amount of senior living that's on the higher end communities. And then you see a great amount of what they might call affordable or low income. What you're not seeing is middle income. And as the baby boomers now are aging, they need the middle market segment of that population needs somewhere to grow. There's studies out there, without getting into specifics, that show that the middle market, right, of seniors is growing from 8 million to 14 million, right, until through the end of 2029. That's a huge number of population that needs somewhere to live, right? And that's what we did. We took those numbers, we did our study, and we looked at this hospital was sitting there decayed for the last 25 years and said, this is a perfect place to put this product. And so when you ask what segment do we believe in, we really believe in that middle market senior living segment, right? And we also believe in the fact that you know, as the years seem to fly by, buildings are aging, and people, for whatever reason, or school districts for whatever reason, are leaving the old buildings behind and moving into newer ones. And there's a market for what happens to those buildings. We see that there's office space that's just not getting leased up anymore because of COVID, right? What's happening to those markets? So I come from, my background in where we're expanding is those areas. It's in the middle market senior living, and it's in repurposing these buildings that have great value, have great bones, and need investors that are willing to see that there's opportunity out there, right? And cities that are willing to work with you, labor force that's willing to think outside the box, right? And you put it all together, and what do you have? In our opinion, you have a secret for success. And we're very excited for our project and the future in making it happen. even in light of COVID, right? Even in light of the fact that we could have an economic downturn or even a bigger economic downturn, right? And so we're really comfortable and really believe in those residential markets and in those buildings that are some that are vacant or some that will eventually end up coming vacant because of where market trends are leading.
Excellent. And you know what, someone actually, Scott Solverson had just put that in the chat, you know, to see, you know, about not much lending for senior living, you know, right now. And he was just saying, you know, do you see it, you know, that you know, having an increase anytime soon, and obviously everybody is really concerned with the health of the residents at this time because of COVID. So do
you want me to touch on that?
Well, yeah, why don't you go?
Yeah,
take a little further. Absolutely.
Yeah, so right, we were smack dab in the middle of that. Not to tell our sad story, but we had everything completed. It was a historic tax credit deal. And our last piece of the puzzle was our construction loan. And right before COVID hit, so COVID really kind of seemed to hit, without getting into the politics of it all, seemed to really hit like in January, February, March, right? And right when it was at the beginning of hitting, our lender, who was a smaller lender, said they couldn't take the risk and backed out. And we were 2 weeks away from closing. 2 weeks. We had everything else in line. We had all our tax credits in line, the city incentives in line, everything was in line, and they backed out. And what we had done was we realized we don't know what we don't know, and so we hired on a capital advisor, right? And hired out a capital advisor out of Pennsylvania called D2 Capital Advisors, and said to them, we're too close to the end not to finish here. And they went out to market across the country and found non-traditional lenders, right? So you may not be able to find traditional lenders who are ready to make that investment yet during these times, but found debt funds that were willing to lend, right? But the key to that, for us at least, was having a management team that was able to give a track record of success in downturns in the economy. And so we had partnered up with Guarded Management Solutions in our project. They're the 11th largest assisted living firm in the country. And we had spent several months with our debt fund showing and proving to them that in light of COVID, their numbers remained on the upward trend, right? And that their numbers were remaining solid, and that they were small enough to be able to make the necessary changes to ensure the safety of their residents and to keep their vacancy rates low. So that was another mix of working with a capital advisor, which I believe in. If you've got a project that you believe in, and you have a management company that you believe is second to none, I believe that there's sources out there for these funds, and it might take a little bit to get to them, and it may be a little bit expensive at first, right? So I'm not telling you it wasn't expensive, and we had to sharpen our pencil and take a little bit less, but we believed in our project so much that we found a lender who was willing to loan, and so that was exciting.
Well, and I, you know, one of the things that I love about that project is the heart and the story, really, of your company, and you know, putting all in, so to speak. And we're going to circle back around to you and hear a little bit more about that piece and that capital piece in a little bit. But Julie, I know you had mentioned.
Sorry, Karen, if I was going to interject real quick, since we're talking about some of these properties. You know, historically, data center development, redevelopment has been land, industrial buildings well positioned for retrofit. And we've seen that a lot, especially with JD signing the Illinois Data Center Incentives Bill essentially a year ago.
Mhm.
What we're seeing now, and in Dupage, I would say too, is the office climate has changed dramatically, definitely in the near term, potentially long term, and how we all use our actual offices. So we're seeing a lot of people look or kind of pivot to looking at well-positioned office buildings for data center conversion, which, you know, if you told me that a year and a half ago, I would have said no way. But that's just one interesting thing I want to bring up, and then I'll give the mic back to you, but thank you.
No, no problem. And that goes for everyone. Just cut me off. No worries, because we're all getting to the nitty gritty of this stuff here. Julie, I just was going to circle back to you really quickly because I know you had mentioned the CPACE funding, and you know, I think that was that part of what was going on with Michael's project, or?
So I believe it is, and it's, you know, without delving completely into CPACE now, because I know we're going to cover it in a little bit, but from our standpoint on the CPACE side, we are seeing more and more of this in the market where a senior lender or another capital provider is getting nervous and either completely pulling out or they're getting skittish on their original LTV commitment. So it's leaving a wider and wider gap of equity for the sponsor to sort of fill in. So we actually, Greenworks, we had our best year. We've been around for 6 years, but we had our best year ever last year in the COVID environment. And it was primarily because of the senior lenders kind of pulling back. And we're able to jump in and, you know, again, provided that the energy efficient components are there. But we're able to jump in and really sort of fill that capital stack.
Well, and I was to that point, I was going to ask Sean, kind of if Sean McCarthy now actually, if there was anything that you wanted to add to that follow-up question. We kind of, you know, did a big old drive around the parking lot, but just to remind everybody, you know, I was, you know, really also wanting to know if there was any, you know, certain types of properties that might be more attractive to investors, since we're talking about investment.
Well, going to like a little bit about the trends of what we're seeing.
Yes.
Internet is a necessity. And I think we've learned that during COVID, that everyone's, you know, we have more people working from home, but people want robust coverage and connectivity. So some of the trends we're seeing is more of an increase for cybersecurity, Wi-Fi, and really data consumption. So from successful developments, what we are seeing is that successful developments really have technology infrastructure in place when they're going through their design process and planning. And it's equally as important when you're looking for gas, electric, and water right now, is what we're seeing. So some of the trends are mostly that building tech infrastructure into the building and development during the construction process. This way you can better partner in planning for technology needs for your customers, your developers, and your property managers and tenants. I can get into later some of what we're seeing specifically in smart community or the multifamily industry, similar to what Ron was saying on the first panel.
Sure.
Well, I'll just, you know, multifamily, we're seeing smart communities platform really taking a hold of a lot of these multifamily developments. People are spending more time at home more than ever. It gives residents control of automated home devices. For easy to use for apps, property managers can use to save energy, manage doors and lights, vacant units, HVAC systems. So we're really seeing a lot of that technology infrastructure built into a lot of these projects, more so than we've seen in the past.
Well, and that actually is a really good segue into this next area of conversation that we wanted to talk about. And obviously, yes, there's this big surge in data center investment, increased usage, you know, with IoT and big data really being the big key drivers of that. But, you know, are we seeing that increase out here in the Western Suburbs and specifically Dupage County? And if so, what does that really mean for, business and job growth in the area? And I guess then as a follow-up to that, would you say that then data centers really are evolving, and how are they really impacting, our market? Dan, I know you mentioned it, when you first spoke. So if you want to, kick off this part, and Sean, I know that you have a lot of expertise in this area as well. So Dan, I'll have you go ahead.
Yeah, like I said, Sean, I don't want to sound like the realtor. Sean's the realtor expert, but location. The ABCs of, the Chicago metro area is so poised for data centers and always has been. One of the things businesses want is skilled workforce. Next is the ability of good transportation system to move products and people. And Chicago metro areas always had that. Planes, trains, automobiles, now data centers. So, John Candy would be a good one to add that to. But the importance of Chicago in this area is the need for 5G and data is the other Sean Zoom, that we're talking about technologies. The need is off the charts going forward. And the one thing about being a village in this group here, so on Dupage, I talked about Cisco having labor and management, and we have a legislative committee that was forwarding a bill, and we brought it to Choose Dupage, and Dupage got on top of a bill that was where Chicago used to be right at the top and then started to lose to other cities as they were offering tax incentives to offset the sales tax and income tax for these data centers. And next thing we saw that demand start to go to cities that weren't as centrally located, weren't as good, but this tax incentive. So all these collaborative village got together and got this bill passed. And my gosh, just in the short period of time, the savings already, I believe they said there's already been over 400 new jobs created and like 4.5 billion in investment. And that's just since 2019, and it's only going to go up. The reason we're so poised, there's no hazard here. We don't have hurricanes, and we don't have massive floods, and we don't have fires and earthquakes. So we are poised to be the number one. I think we're number 2 now in the country. We've surpassed the Silicon Valley. So I only see this as an area where we're going to continue to thrive. And these places, they don't, and some people don't say they bring that many jobs. Well, they do bring jobs there, but they bring a lot of outside professionalism. They always have to retrofit. They're buying the supplies from area locals. So, and they also bring the status of other businesses want it. Where data centers locate, others want to be there. So it is really a spark that is igniting an economic fire.
Well, I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. A spark that's lighting an economic fire. Sean, you got room for Dan on your team there? I don't know.
Absolutely. Dan, you bring up a couple, great points, and I going back to the reliability of our grid and our infrastructure, that is recognized nationally. We also have a very low cost of utility, comparatively speaking, to the other states. And I'll bring up the recent example in greater DFW and the shutdown of a lot of, sadly, a lot of power and water. A lot of those major data center operators were on diesel for days. And, the state had asked them to come off the grid, and they were happy to do that, honestly, because they didn't want the ups and downs of the rolling brownouts. But I will say that events like that, and then you look at Chicago, we had 1.5 feet of snow and we didn't blink, right? So you see events like that, and long-term, it's meaningful. And I say that because you look back at Sandy, which had a huge impact in the New Jersey area and in New York. That was very meaningful. We saw a lot of, especially financial and trading firms, pivot away from that specific area because, New Jersey is very prone to flooding historically. It's kind of swampland for the most part. But anyway, our infrastructure from a fiber and utility standpoint are phenomenal, and they are recognized. Dan, you brought up, and we kind of not battle, but we educate a lot with various municipalities across the region as it relates to the knee-jerk reaction of, well, you're going to put up a 250,000 square foot data center, but there's only 20 jobs. And you walk these, local governments through the process, and it's truly an ecosystem. And we've done this for a handful of municipalities, specifically around Elk Grove. Elk Grove, as an example, is main and main data center historically, but you're seeing expansion outside of that because they're very limited now, not only from just a pure real estate standpoint, but ComEd has done a great job of expanding those substations so they can still support absolutely some growth there, but they're running out of square footage. And so you're seeing expansion into neighboring municipalities. We did this, in Des Plaines for a development with Iron Mountain, where Des Plaines said, where are the jobs? And we kind of walked them through and actually took them to buildings that only have 20 full-time employees in Elk Grove as an example. But if you pull into the parking lot of that building on any given day, there's 200 cars. And these are electrical subcontractors, high voltage, low voltage. These are software consultants, HVAC, mechanical. It's a living, breathing, piece of real estate, and it can be demonstrated absolutely that you may have 20 full-time positions there as an example, but there's a huge ecosystem of, Dan, to your point, union labor going back and forth, on a daily basis. So they are very meaningful. And I would invite, the greater Dupage municipalities to kind of get a little bit smarter on that. Not that they're not, but I think it's very important to understand the ecosystem. And then the other thing too is revenue is near and dear to any municipality, right? So one of the things that we typically do is show the municipality, you get a retail scrape off of ComEd utility bills, right? So the municipalities oftentimes just don't understand the overall impact and revenue generation, to their tax coffers. And oftentimes, the example in Des Plaines, the utility scrape was 10x what the real estate tax bill was. So it's educating folks along that front that it's very meaningful. The other thing is, and then I'll shut up, it's low impact. And by that, I mean, they're not major distribution centers. They're not bringing in outside of the initial development, but it's not a Amazon Prime going in and out and down your roads and up your streets and all of that kind of stuff, which people, tend to have concern with. The impact is low. The tax revenue is high. These data centers, if you were to talk to, I'll go back to Elk Grove, if you talk to their fire and police departments, they love them. And why do they love them? Because they're secure. They never call them. They don't need them. And they protect their buildings because they have a couple $1,000s per square foot invested in those buildings from a fire standpoint. Fire departments check them, like they typically do a couple times a year, but they're very secure, and they allow these municipalities to reinvest into their schools and, public services without adding, disruption. So
and just jumping onto what Sean's been saying, I think, this data center incentive package that the state passed, that was years in the making. So it was a lot of hard work for a lot of people on this panel and a lot of people who were listening in as well. Years of negotiating with the governor's office and the legislature to get this passed as another tool in the tool belt for our local economic development partners on this call. So I think really a hat tip to our local leaders for understanding the need for this instead of losing data center opportunities to Iowa and some of our neighboring states. This really allowed us level the playing field and allowed us to shine, similar to some of the things that Sean mentioned regarding our energy costs, what Dan said about our location, and you really using a lot of our natural resources to sell this state.
One example, Facebook, you probably read about this, all of you, but Sean, to your point, they bought 500 acres in DeKalb, and they haven't told me this, but I would guarantee that that would not have happened in the state of Illinois if not for that data center bill that was passed. That would have gone to Iowa. They would have continued to invest in Iowa, where they have a huge presence because of those incentives. And Microsoft quietly, publicly but quietly, has been growing like a weed in and around Elk Grove with some larger land acquisitions. And again, that DeKalb project is a 5-10 year build, right, Dan? I mean, you're going to have electricians out there for a long time. These Microsoft investments they're not 6-month builds, they're a couple year builds. So anyway, thank you.
And if I jump in one last comment, it's exactly what both Sean's are saying is, everything, all politics is local. And what we have to learn is that economic growth, I mean, it's expanding out these data centers out in the Western Suburbs because of land, now DeKalb. And downstate legislators, well, why am I giving a data center? This is mostly a Chicago or urban thing. Why do we want to give a tax break there? But when we do that, we raise, and just like Iowa was taking, I know skilled tradesmen and women were going down to Iowa building those because they didn't have the trade. Now we're losing our educated workforce, skilled workforce, going down there to Iowa, working down there for years. And if they would have continued to grab this, we cipher these and we hurt these businesses and these men and women that work for them. So the whole it's like an orchestra. All the pieces have to work together. And just because downstate you might not be thinking that it's for you, here you're now benefiting. So when we work collaboratively, instead of silos, it really does help, the economic vision.
Yeah, someone had used the term ecosystem before, and everything's just got to line up, and everybody has a piece and a part and a role to play for sure. And I just think the data center, market itself is really a good example of what can happen. Truly, truly, truly. Julie, I know that we did several times, we mentioned the C-PACE financing piece, but I'm wondering if we can, roll back a little bit and maybe have you just explain just for everybody, because we do have a lot of folks on the call today, really what it is, and if you could describe, how it can be, a really useful financing tool for commercial property owners and developers.
Sure. C-PACE is fairly new, 5-6 years. But again, because everybody in the finance industry loves acronyms, C-PACE stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. And really what the product does is it provides property owners with very, very low cost, long-term financing for energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy projects. And most importantly, while facilitating sustainability efforts, which again is really important to our company, but while facilitating these sustainability efforts, and I also think we can all agree is becoming more and more important, the program really reduces property owners' annual costs and provides dramatically better than market financing for green projects, both new or rehabs. So really, C-PACE in its most basic form, the program starts with a state level government policy that classifies clean energy updates as a public benefit. So very, very similar to a new sewer, water line, road. So the state basically has said that anything that's clean energy really is as much of a public benefit as a new sewer or water line. And then these updates can be financed with no money down, and then they're repaid on the property tax bill over a term that matches the useful life of the improvements, which is typically 20 to 30 years. So you're really getting a low cost, low cost capital for 20 to 30 years. The assessment then actually transfers on the sale of the property. And in many cases, it can be passed through to tenants, where it's appropriate. And as part of the program, both hard and soft costs related to the energy improvements can be funded. So I mentioned that this is a state level government policy, and obviously Illinois has passed the legislation. There are currently 32 states that have passed the legislation. And then what happens is once the legislation is passed in the state, then each municipality or county has to opt in. And in Illinois, DuPage County has opted in, Cook, Kendall, Lake, Winnebago, and a couple of others. It will eventually happen for all of the counties. It just takes a little bit longer in some of them. For the CPACE product, most asset types qualify: multifamily, hotels and office, manufacturing, retail. But there's a couple things that don't qualify. One is residential. It is not legislated to work in the residential world, and government buildings. So, you know, again, it can be used for new construction. It can be used for gut rehabs. I feel like I'm kind of running through this quickly, but it's such a new product, and there's so much that it encompasses. But CPACE really, it reduces your cost of capital. That's one of the biggest things. It's going to reduce your owner equity needs. Again, the tax assessment structure of it, it allows to pass through on triple net leases. And in the hospitality, the hotel world, in most cases, the room surcharges can actually be passed through. So in essence, you're getting free money. I'm asked frequently if CPACE works with new markets and historic tax credits, and we do. We play very well in the sandbox with both of those, and all sort of come in together to sort of fill that capital stack. The other thing I'm asked frequently are what measures are included. I could sit here and give you a huge list, but it really runs from HVAC to automated building controls to water conservation. The building envelope in many times can be included. So that's very, very general, but that's really what CPACE is. We're there to provide the funds, long-term funds, to really sort of finance those energy efficient components. So I'll kind of wrap up there, unless otherwise I can go on and on. The other thing I do want to, which I want to point out very quickly, and a lot of folks that have actually used CPACE before don't realize that there's actually a retroactive component to the program. And what I mean by that is if a project's already been completed, you have done your CapEx, you are finished, everything's done, closed, you're stabilized, you're moving on. As long as there are energy efficient upgrades in that building, we can actually, quote, look back. And in most cases, we can look back 24 months and in essence, recapitalize those components into the CPACE product. So we have found that, like I mentioned, we had our best year last year, and I think that's a couple of reasons. Number one, the senior lenders pulling back a little bit. And number two, we've used this retroactive component a lot, especially in the hotel world again. So in these pandemic times, it's been helpful for folks to sort of recapitalize their project, maybe right-size their senior lender, maybe make their senior lender feel a little bit more comfortable by escrowing some of their payments. So I just think there's a lot of folks that aren't familiar with the retroactive component to it. So in a nutshell, you know, that's really what CPACE is. And I think especially from Greenworks standpoint, we like to, it's a great financing tool. Again, it really helps you fill in that capital stack, but we're also really helping the environment, which to us is super important.
When was this legislation passed in Illinois?
Pardon me?
When was the legislation passed in Illinois?
The legislation was actually passed about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And then the counties are slowly starting to adopt it. I actually find in my position, I probably spend 80% of my time educating folks.
Yep.
I was just going to say
a
that.
lot of folks, yeah, I mean, that's really what I spend most of my time doing is educating folks now. It's a great tool. I am an ex-banker. I was a commercial lender for over 25 years, most recently a chief lending officer at a community bank, and I made this jump over, and it is a great product. I mean, it's just kind of a double win for everybody. It fills in that stack, and it's also, we're helping the environment.
And I saw in the chat, Mark from Kane County is on the call, and he said that they're getting ready to close their third deal for Kane County. So it does sound like, you know, all the collar counties kind of are all in on this, which is great. Because again, all cogs on the wheel working together, right?
That's exactly right.
As a Kane County resident, I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, good. Okay, great. You know, Michael, we talked a little bit about that capital piece in the beginning, but I'm thinking, you know, I wasn't quite sure of the relationship if your project was really taking advantage of that CPACE part or not. But you know, I would love for you to share with everybody kind of the story of how this project came to be, to sort of kind of wrap up this panel, if you will, and talk just a little bit more about you know, I guess the state of capital markets and kind of how you used it to your advantage, I guess you could say, for your project.
Let me transition to our capital stack first, right? And so we kind of hit upon everything that Julie just spoke of. You know, we had city incentives, right? We had owner equity, a significant amount. We had state and federal historic tax credits. We had state and federal new market tax credits, right? We had private construction loan, and the piece that bound everything together was Kane County CPACE program, right? Because at the end of the day, when we put in as much equity as we did, and we needed a certain amount of liquidity that we needed, CPACE truly was that gap, right? I mean, I don't want to underestimate what the city of Aurora did for us, right? But Kane County as well, right? Taking those two governmental authorities, what they did, and we could have taken advantage of more than we did, but we took a $3 million pace. We took a $3 million pace. And what we do know is that we have the option that once the lenders and once we work on getting out of our construction loan and into our mini perm and perm, that we could always go back and get more on the CPACE. And that'll be nice too, because I don't know if Julie had mentioned this, but one of the nice things is that it's not I think she did actually, but it doesn't mess with the priority of the first lender, right? And once you lead with that to these lenders, and then you get a lender who's willing to sit down and look at what it actually is all about, they realize how good of a program it is. What you do is sometimes you run into some lenders that just don't have the patience to understand a new product, and then you have developers who don't have the patience to work with the banks on those new products. But then you get people like Julie or the team that we had, and they sit down and do a great job. And so our capital stack had a little bit of everything, and so it was quite complex, but worth it in the long run. And Karen, to your point of where we see the capital markets, I kind of did hit on that before, but I'm just going to kind of restate that we feel that there's lenders out. Let me just hit. Obviously, capital markets is a broad range. You can paint that with a broad brush. My knowledge of the capital markets, right, is more with construction lending and lending in general, not necessarily with the the stock market and so on and so forth. But so what I've seen with in the capital markets in that regard, and who's out there lending. Again, it's not what we found was, especially on the bigger projects, it may not have been necessarily the traditional lender, but it was debt funds, and it was debt funds who, with interest rates low, and the volatility of the stock market, with the presidential election, we're looking for projects that offered them some stability. And I understand that that's a relative term, because how stable can you be in COVID? But when you put together a city, county that is willing to work with the developer, right? And then you put a developer who's driven, and then you put together a management team that is a track record of success, right? And you put consultants in their right places, right? And then again, you put in the workforce to get the project done, because a lot of these construction lenders will tell you they're not necessarily concerned with, they're concerned with the operations. They're concerned, is it going to get built, right? And when you bring in workforce that can build it, you start to chip away at the elephant, right? How do you need an elephant one bite at a time? And that's what our project was 100%, because of the size and complexity of it. And we started to paint the picture of everybody's put into the right places, and including that management team who, for instance, Garden, right? The Garden has a 10% higher lease up rate across the country than the average senior living firm. So we put together all those pieces and really got the lender comfortable in more ways than you would typically have to get a lender comfortable, if that makes sense, right? So they're not just looking at the pro forma, they're looking at you're finding a debt fund that's looking at the people, that's looking at the team, and looking at the track record of success. And so Karen, one of the things we had talked about in our pre-meetings is making sure people understand there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We believe that 100%. You just have to believe that.
Right.
And you have to find the people and the team and the city, municipality, the county that believes in it and is aggressive. City of Naperville, what a great job they're doing. City of Aurora, great job. Elk Grove Village, I take my kids up there to basketball practice all the time. Man, that is a thriving village. So all these towns and municipalities that are willing to invest in themselves, I think it's important to identify those areas. Come with your concept, come with your vision, put the right people in place.
Yeah, because everybody wants the win.
Correct.
And I think it goes to really kind of what we've been saying all morning long is that, everybody wants the same things, and it's they want that for their residents as well. So it makes perfect sense. Sean, I saw you kind of perk up a little bit, and I'm not sure, Sean Reynolds, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything, but real quick, panelists, don't forget, we've had some requests for your contact information. If you are comfortable doing so, if you wouldn't mind just either, putting your website or your email or a contact for yourselves in that chat. But Sean, were you going to add anything to this area of?
Not so much on the debt side as an example, but just kind of chiming in on where the various investment funds are kind of looking.
Yeah.
Over the pandemic, I have had conversations with scores of fund managers that historically invested in office, and they really, candidly are kind of scared of that right now. And we're seeing non-traditional, non-traditional funds invest or pursue heavily data center investment. And I think it's a couple reasons. One, they're kind of scared of the future of the office market. But the second thing is work from home, the pandemic, the reliance on Zoom and e-learning for all of you that have had the joy of that. It's become front of mind. So the traditional person that was looking at, I'm going to invest in this office building or this industrial building or retail, data centers became front of mind. So we're seeing not only, non-traditional pension funds that have never bought a data center, now they're coming in aggressively, along with private equity groups. And, the investment market for well-leased data centers is where I spent a lot of my time. And it has been unbelievably competitive. For those of you in the finance capital markets world, non-investment grade long-term leases are generating, high 5 cap rates. And, historically, those would have been 8, 9 type cap rates. So there's a lot of competition locally within the United States. Another example I would give, I sold a building downtown a couple months ago, had a long-term lease in place kind of west of downtown. And we had 5 finalists. 3 of them were outside of the US, 2 were Asian, 1 was out of the UK. Ultimately, a group out of San Francisco ended up winning the project. But the international world still wants to invest in the United States, especially from a real estate standpoint. And it's just been interesting to watch a lot of these funds pivot towards data centers. We're really active in that. That's where I'm probably spending most of my day today. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And thank everybody. There's just so much information, and, if I had my way, we'd stay for another hour, but I know that we're limited on time and everybody's got their own things to do. But, really quickly, if there's anything that, you want to say in closing, just kind of, raise your hand here as I wrap up, and we can certainly go to you if you have any final words. I just really want to say thank you to each of you, and panel 1 as well, because that discussion was really informative and interesting. And we just appreciate all of you, both panels, taking your time to share your knowledge and your insight with the rest of us. And I also want to thank this morning's sponsors. You did just see them up on the screen. Thank you, sponsors, as well as the team from, RE Journals. You guys have just done a wonderful job. You always do a wonderful job, but it's just been exceptional the way you've been able to pivot. And, coming from the business community, just thank you for doing all that you do for the rest of us. Great job putting this event together. That's it. Those are my little thank yous. Anybody else got anything to say here before we sign off for the good folks that are watching? Everybody's good.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Karen. Thank you for the shout out. You guys are the best. I do have to put in a plug. We're doing our 2nd awards show in Chicago this year. And it's going to be so much fun because we're going to be live. And we do it like the Oscars. So it's super fun. Great evening to get all dressed up and have a good time. So watch for that coming up in your email. We want to get a lot of projects nominated, people. And we have special awards this year. You mentioned it, COVID Pivot. So if you know anybody that really just dug in, doubled down, made the most of COVID, that's going to be a really fun award to hand out this year. We actually have 4 of them depending on the category. So, hey,
that's really cool.
Thanks everybody. This was fantastic. Love it. I think we got to do more suburban events. I think suburban Chicago's booming.
Where it's happening, man.
It is. It is. It's good stuff. Well, thanks everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This will
Everybody
be
have a
on
great
YouTube at
day.
some point.
Good weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.